Please join me in welcoming Carol Abbott-Zilla. Welcome.
Thank you, John. Welcome again, everybody, to our How to Eat All Winter class. But first, I would love to hear a little bit from you about something you're happy about in your garden, or something that you're frustrated about in your garden, or disappointed or something. So please, please be bold. We need at least a couple of people to tell us about something that they're glad about, that they're enjoying, or discovered, or something like that. So please just start talking. I'm going to call on somebody. I'll have to threaten you. Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry
Thank
for
you,
jumping
John.
in there. Yeah, if there's good things, I think I heard you earlier in one of the sessions talk about peppers. So I went out and got some seeds, and I'm growing peppers for the first time. So I found a nice hot spot up against the stucco siding of the house, and they seem to be growing really well. Other things, potatoes are blooming profusely. My macaw ozette potatoes are turning out to be tall. They're not quite blooming yet, but they're about the same height as the butterballs, but they're turning out to be kind of narrow. But I'm interested to see how those will do. Tomatoes had been setting fruit since June, so I've got quite a few of those. If everybody doesn't remember, I plant all my tomatoes from seed. So, this is the earliest I've had them set fruit.
Oh yeah, so we had that warm June. That's really great.
Yeah, and on the downside, right after your last session, I had been busy and hadn't been paying much attention to my cabbage and broccoli and that type of thing. And right after your sessions last time, I went out and I thought, I better take a look, because we were talking about insects that eat cabbage and other stuff. And I had the imported cabbage worm absolutely massacre a whole bunch of my plants.
Wow.
So I've been really vigilant after that and picking them off. And I live on the water, so I throw them in the water for fish food. And seem to have gotten rid of them all. No butterfly or whatever they are, moth butterfly or whatever, floating around now and then, but I haven't had any reoccurrence. But the plants are all doing well and seem to be recovering. Great. So that was on the downside.
Even though it was bad, they recovered.
Mostly. I think every plant has recovered. Some that got eaten more than others aren't recovering quite as fast, but they all appear to have the little head forming and seem to be doing well. So that's my good and my bad.
That's wonderful. Thank you. You've shared so much information about tomatoes and your potato varieties that you are growing that are interesting. So I really appreciate that. I'm glad things are going well and you had some recovery. Do we have anybody else? Who else would please tell us something? Could be just frustration in your garden or just something glad about. You can do it. Oh, Judith, will you tell us about these photos that are in here? Happy tomatoes and peppers. They're in the chat. I don't know if you see this, everybody. Judith, do you want to tell us about this? Oh, I see. Or do you want to just use print? Okay. Well, there are photos in the chat in a solar greenhouse of Judith's happy tomatoes and peppers. That's cool. Solar Gem is the brand. Wow. And it's getting really hot in there. So that's really neat. Thank you for showing that. That's neat. Your first trial with this greenhouse. Very cool. And then Karen says, happy but baffled by hardly any pests. Slugs and deer being our main concern. I have to say slugs and deer are my main concern usually. But I'm glad about that. Oh, we got one more message here. Oh, a granite, like crushed granite floor in Judith's greenhouse. I'm just reading those for those who can't see the chat. Okay, well, we're going to talk about eating in winter, which even if you're frustrated with your garden right now, might be great news because you sort of get this second chance at this time of year to have a lot of food. So if you're saying, well, my beds, I didn't get to them and half of them are empty, or even if they're full, you will see that you have many ways to plant in those beds. So let's take a look at how you can do that. And what we're going to learn tonight is all of these things. Why grow it, what you can grow, how to fit it in, because your garden might be totally full right now, when to plant it, and then how to protect those plants over winter. I'm going to skip that one. Okay, I think we've seen this picture a lot, but this is just a good one for this class. So see all those lumps, some of them are sort of little round lumps, and some of them are long, oblong lumps, and you can see a plant sticking out the front. Every one of those lumps is food that was fine in the snow, either because it's protected or because it's just a really tough little variety that does fine in the cold. And so that's what we're going to learn about tonight. So why, okay, this is why you'd want to do winter gardening. You have a garden that's empty half of the year if you don't garden for winter, or at least for fall. So why not use it for the whole year and get food out of it? It's super satisfying to eat the food that you grew in the middle of winter and be like a squirrel. You can even have a lot of food for your Thanksgiving dinner, if you do Thanksgiving. It's very nutritious. It's super low food miles, and it sits there in the garden. So you never say, oh, I don't have any veg. You have a lot of veg all the time. It's super convenient because it stays fresh and it never goes bad. So it's like this outdoor refrigerator, but it doesn't rot. And it is an emergency preparedness skill, not only because you have food in the winter, but because you learn more by doing this. And this class is sponsored and originated by Bainbridge Prepares. You don't need to water in the winter and the early spring, which is so nice, much less maintenance. It just kind of holds by itself. Also, your ground space often opens up in your winter for winter veg. So right now, we'll see how you might get more space in your garden, and you might wonder what to do with it. And also, late summer and early fall, it gives you a lull in your garden chores. The leaves aren't coming down yet, but you aren't fighting spring weeds, and you're not having to mow things down all the time. So you might have a little more mental space and a little more time. And lastly, I think this is the last one, you're going to have skill and knowledge that you gain from this. And it makes you a better gardener and more competent. And it's fun to learn. It's fun to learn something new. So as a gardener, I like to have something that I'm learning every year. I don't want to just do the same thing. So that's kind of how I actually started to expand, like, what can I grow in the winter? So I grow one thing per year, and I kind of expanded that. So there are several sources of winter food. Some things we plant in the spring and we're too late to plant them, but it's not too late to learn about them. And then you harvest them like pumpkins or something, and you store them for a really long time. We're not really going to cover that much in this class, but next September, actually, the September class, we'll talk about them. You also can plant in the spring or the summer, and you can eat it all winter fresh. We're going to talk about that today. And there's also a third category where you plant in the summer and you actually don't eat it all winter, but it gives you food in the spring when there's nothing else coming out of the garden. So let us take a look here. So most of these things are things that you would plant in the spring and harvest and store. So most of the things in this picture we're not going to talk about, but I will talk about the upper left. That's garlic. If you're new here, we plant garlic in the fall. It's pointy end up, 1 to 2 inches deep. But before you plant it, if you haven't amended your beds with compost this year, you want to put some compost in your bed where you're going to put your garlic. And you do put all-purpose fertilizer in there and turn it in gently. And then plant the garlic, and you should use certified seed garlic. You can get it from a nursery or you can mail order it. And then we cover that up with leaves, usually chopped leaf mulch, because it keeps the weeds down and it keeps the garlic from freezing. If we get a bad freeze that freezes the top 3 inches of the soil, we don't want that to happen. So we cover it with a thick layer of leaves. And the garlic grows great roots and even some top growth this fall and a little bit in the winter. And then in the spring, we side dress it. When we see crocuses, we put some more AP fertilizer or some nitrogen on there. And we get really big, healthy garlic. Yeah, I usually do that at the end of October. Does anybody have another tip about garlic? Planting for, so this actually doesn't dry down, and you won't actually harvest the garlic that you plant in October until next summer. But it's fun to have that garlic. And we're going to talk about some fresh harvest now. So there are 3 fresh harvest windows: fall, winter, and then early spring for next year. But all of those things we usually plant in summer, actually, and a couple of them we can do in the early fall. So let's talk about things that you can fall harvest first. So I think winter harvest is really powerful, but some people are saying, you know what, I actually am a snowbird, I'm not going to be here, or I don't want to be out there, you know, getting my vegetables out in the cold. So maybe you just want a little quick fall harvest crop. So here's one. This is arugula. They're both called arugula. They're not actually very closely related at all. They're not the same genus even, but they taste similar, so we call them both that. The one on the right grows really slowly. It's great to plant. You can throw it out anytime, but it probably won't produce a crop for you until next spring and summer. And it doesn't bolt. But the one on the left is what they call salad arugula quite often. You can direct seed that. You could direct seed it now, but it might bolt quickly. Often people do it mid-August to mid-September. I would not go later than mid-September because it gets like that high and then just stops. So I would do like multiple crops. Do one mid-August, do one, you know, 10 days later, 10 days later, because you can always use it as a salad green and it's great and it can be a really quick grower. Sometimes it will bolt easily, so that's why people do it in the fall. You can also do fall peas. I have very specific information about fall peas. You direct seed them from late June, too late, to mid-July. So this would be a great thing to do now. You need a pea that can handle the summer, right? Because they're going to grow their plant when it's hot, and peas are not usually a hot weather plant. But then in September, they're going to produce those peas for you. So you have to get it going. You can't get it going so that it's really big in November because it won't produce peas. You need that sun to make it flower. So we want them to mature quickly. They're usually a shorter variety, not a 6-foot tall one. You need them to be resistant to 2 diseases. One is called P. Nation mosaic virus, which is abbreviated PEMV. So if you're looking at a variety in a catalog, it will say at the end of the listing PEMV, or you can Google it and it will come up. For peas, I can already tell you that Maestro as a shelling pea and Cascadia as a snap pea are resistant to P. Nation mosaic virus. Powdery mildew resistance is also super important. So you want the listing to also say at the end of the listing in the catalog, little paragraph that describes it, it should also say PM in big letters. That means it's resistant to powdery mildew. And it doesn't mean that it will never get powdery mildew. What it means is it will produce a crop and then it will get powdery mildew. So it's just resistant for a while. So ideally the peas would go in the part of your property that gets like 6 hours of morning sun to, you know, to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it would get shade because it's better for them if they have cooler growing conditions. Have I ever put them out where they only get like blistering afternoon sun? I have not, but I have had them in a place where they get quite hot sun till about 3:30, 4 o'clock. And so they got quite hot, but they did okay. Let's see, you can shade your little baby seedlings with some cloth, or I take 2 window screens off of my house and I just prop them very securely over the seedlings, because if they blow over and smash them in the wind, that's sad. They do want really even water to keep them growing. Those plants on the left are in that bed that got pretty hot sun, you know, it got morning sun, but it also got it up to 3 or 4 in the afternoon. But you can see that that's chopped leaves covering the ground underneath them, because keeping their roots cool is great. Johnny's has a list of resistance codes if you want to look for resistance codes and what they mean. So here's the Johnny's website that I referred to last time, and it has this massive list. And see, it says DM, downy mildew, or that's not ours, but it tells you what the disease code means and what's susceptible to it. Lots of times it only attacks cucumber, for example. So I have a link for this on the resource page, and I also gave it to you last month. And I have also the varieties Maestro and Cascadia linked on the page. Sorry, out of control here. The peas in the picture were planted on July 15th, and I harvested them the entire month of September. And I also that same year planted at the end of June, and those all matured before September. So I really wanted fall peas. So I went a little bit later as well and did an experiment that same year. So those are my specific dates. That's what worked for me. You can do bush beans as well. I have not done late bush beans in a really long time, but the calendar that I really trust says until late July. I probably start them as soon as possible if you haven't got your beans in yet. These are not dry beans, although these short little plants in the picture that's the way some dried beans grow as well. But these are just fresh green beans. You won't get a big, long, drawn out crop. What you get is a crop all at once like this. So people use them for making dilly beans and just, you know, 1 week of eating tons of green beans, or freezing. Sometimes people freeze these beans. So some people try this with pole beans, but the short bush beans are a better bet because they mature more quickly. Does anybody have a particular favorite variety for bush beans? Our experienced gardeners, have you tried bush beans or any varieties that you particularly liked of the kinds of plants that I mentioned so far? Nope, apparently not. Heidi wants to know, did I have to water the peas daily? No, because they were very well mulched. I absolutely didn't have to. I put my fingers in the ground to see. And I think even when it was very warm, it's probably every 3rd day. I'm just guessing though, because I don't really remember. But it definitely wasn't every day or every other day. As long as it's moist, they don't need more water to like cool them off or anything, in my experience. Okay, all those brassicas, that's anything related to a cabbage, which includes kohlrabi and kale and all of those things. Here are some start dates. And I have a whole calendar that I'll show you. Broccoli is often started by June 15th for fall harvest. That's just for reference purposes. But there are some broccolis that you can start in July, and I'll show you those in a minute. Kohlrabi, you can start in July. You can start, if you don't have kale growing already, you can start kale now. And you will have, I would plant more plants because they're not going to get as big, but you certainly can plant kale now so that you have kale for your overwinter garden. And of course, they prefer afternoon shade and morning sun, but it doesn't mean like sun 8 to 10. It just means when it's blistering at 5 o'clock, if they're against the south edge of your house, they're not going to be that happy. So to make yourself, give yourself the best chance, if you can put them away from a hot wall and, nudge them over a little bit. So they get a little bit of afternoon shade for that most blistering part of the day. That would make them happy. But, I don't mean to discourage you from putting things in hot spots, because I sometimes, due to rotation, have them out where they get afternoon sun and they do okay. If you would like a broccoli that's very reliable for future broccoli, Bell Star is a really good one for a starter crop. So that might be for your June 15th broccoli planting, really anytime next year. Does anybody have any comments about this fall harvest or any questions? Okay. Okay, let's talk winter harvest. I think this is the most fun and squirrel-like. See all these things? You can harvest all of these things in winter. So let's talk about what a few of them are. You can do bok choy. I love these for winter because when you plant them in the spring, they are so photosensitive, that's so photoperiodic, it's called. They tend to put up like 4 leaves and you think, I'm a genius, I'm growing bok choy. And then they do a flower shoot and it's over. So it can be frustrating. But if you wait until after the solstice to start them, say August, then you can get them going, and it never occurs to them to put up a flower shoot. So they can produce a lot of leaves. So the one on the right is not currently available, but it's one of my favorites. I do give it winter protection, but I eat this all winter. The one on the left, I haven't grown in a really long time, but I called Johnny's Seeds and asked him what they would recommend for somebody to try. And prize choy is what they said. And also prize choy is on some local calendars for winter food growing. Yeah, so we'll talk about how to protect it. It does need a little bit of protection in the winter. This stuff is not lettuce, but I use it instead of lettuce in the winter. And the reason is slugs love to eat lettuce all winter long, and all I get is like shredded lettuce. But the slugs don't eat. They'll live in it, but they don't really eat much of it. So I started August 1st. I planted in cells. I planted out the 31st. It does need rain cover. I'll show you how to do that in a second. And I just harvest the outer leaves all winter. Honestly, the one on the top looks like it's very upright, but it also grows this big head, just like the one in the bottom. So the very bottom leaves are probably touching the ground, and they kind of get a little decayed. So I'd pull those off. But then I just eat, if I plant 12 heads of it, I just sort of evenly take from each plant from the outside. And that feeds me a lot of salad in the wintertime. But in the spring, like mid-March, the outer leaves start to maybe yellow slightly. They just don't seem as succulent. So I pull off those outer leaves and compost them. And I leave a head that's maybe 4 inches across. So it's sticking out of the ground. And I side dress it with nitrogen. So that's blood meal, if you don't mind using that, fish emulsion, fish meal. You might be able to use like alfalfa pellets or granules, anything with a lot of nitrogen. And that lets it know it's time to grow. It says it's spring. And the thing will reproduce an entire head. So I've eaten it all winter. And then the head is pruned down, not pruned down, but stripped of its outer leaves. And then it produces an entirely new head. And it produces in April and May, which, if you think about it, is a time that you do not have a lot in your garden. I don't know if you have a lot in your garden in April and May, but it's actually called the hungry gap because we don't have food typically in a climate like ours. This is giant winter spinach. There are 2 kinds listed on the lower right of this screen. They're very similar. One is, they're both open pollinated, if that's important to you. Can you see how big that leaf is? The leaves are sometimes twice that big, and it's freakishly sweet compared to summer spinach. And I think that's part of its winter frost resistance, because sugar won't allow the water in the leaves to freeze. It's an antifreeze. So it's very cold hardy. I cover it, but I have watched an uncovered plant get covered by snow And I think, well, that's going to be slime. And then the snow melts and the plant looks exactly the same and it's completely fine. So it's, in my experience, very, very hardy. The thing about these, though, is that their seeds are thermally dormant, which means they don't like to sprout above 70 degrees. So if you're trying to do this in August, that's a little bit tricky. So I plant them in cells and then I put the flat on my kitchen floor because it's tile and it's like the coldest spot I can find and it's near a vent. And I seed pretty heavily. And then whatever comes up, I'm happy with and I plant. This is kind of the opposite because it's super tiny. All those names, corn salad, mosh, lambs, lettuce, and wheat, it's all the names for the same thing. This whole plant is maybe 3 or 4 inches across. It's incredibly cold hardy. I think it's one of the few things that can be crisp with frost. Like it seems like it's frozen through and you can harvest it and it thaws instantly when you bring it into your house and it's fine. So it's a really strange little thing. I don't grow a lot of it because I like more flavor. It's very mild. So if you like a mild green, it's great. And if you do plant this, you want to plant a lot of it. And also look for the winter variety. Most, it'll mention something about winter growth or cold hardy or something. If it says specifically summer, that's the wrong kind of this. Kales are super common here in the Northwest. It's the home of happy kale. And kale, in my experience and the experience of many gardeners, can just stay out in the cold for most of the cold. So I like to use whatever kale I already have going in my spring and summer garden. I just keep it going. So I know it's going to get taller and taller and taller, and I'm going to harvest from the bottom, and it's going to end up looking like something Dr. Seuss drew, and it might even want to fall over, so I might have to stake it, but I just let it keep growing. But if you don't want to do that, I would start it as soon as possible, because I want a big plant going into winter. I don't want, plants this big, because then you have to have 20 of them and you don't get that much food off of it. If you are continuing to grow one that you planted in the spring, you can keep it lush by side dressing it with more nitrogen, making sure it gets plenty of water, and putting on leaves to keep its roots cool, because it loves that. And the top one is what I consider a salad kale. It's super tender. And if you braise it, it kind of turns into wet Kleenex, in my opinion, but it's too tender. But it's fantastic and really compellingly delicious to like chiffonade it real fine, really thin, and then make a winter salad out of it. Any salad that you can think of making, you can make with that. And it's not like butter lettuce, but it's delicious. The one on the bottom makes great chips and it's good for braising. So if you're going to have like, sausage with braised greens, then it's great for that. And you can leave them in the ground. And I'm going to mention this, and the kale growers of experience here probably know this, and they're wondering why I'm saying it. But I've had people who grow kale here for years and years and years and don't realize that it makes little flower buds in April and May, maybe even June, that are delicious. So you should leave it there for quite a while if you can. So it gives you tons of food. You can grow beets first week of July, so now. I have done it in later in the month, up to about the middle of the month, and I still got some 4-inch beets, but I didn't get huge beets, and it was out in a very sunny area. So they're a great one for overwintering, and they can just stay in the ground. So you can leave them in the ground and pull them as needed. And you can put, if it's going to freeze, you can keep an eye on the weather. If it's going to freeze, you can put chopped leaves over the top. Some people use a sheet of cardboard. I will talk about that a little bit more when I talk about protection and who gets protection. And if you don't like beets, Boro is a very sweet, lovely beet. It is a hybrid, I think. So if you're not a hybrids person, you don't want that one, but you might try Boro. If you have like one family member who says beets are weird, you might try Boro, or you could try golden beets. Some people like that a lot better. It doesn't have quite the earthy flavor. Am I missing any information about beets? Anybody have any beet tips? Terry wants to know if Violetta bok choy works for winter. I suspect all bok choy works for winter, Terry, but does anybody have, oh, it's not, yeah. Does anybody have any information about Violetta? Well, Terry, I would say, why not try it? Give it as an experiment. You could try that one and another one if you really want bok choy over winter. And Anna says planting in cells. What I mean, yes, I do mean sow in little pots, Anna, but you don't need to have it in light. So you can have, at this time of year, you can sow things outside in cells. The reason I would do that is that it means that the slugs won't mow them, because I'm going to not have those cells on the ground. I'm going to have it up on a milk crate or a table or something outside. And let's see, I just give them regular, garden sun and grow those things on. So I definitely you don't need lights. Heidi asks, how do you know when they're ready to harvest? Oh, beets are ready to harvest when they're bigger than a golf ball. I mean, some people harvest them even smaller, and whatever size you like. So I have harvested beets that were, 4 inches across, and maybe even bigger than that. I once was given a beet that was almost the size of a bowling ball, and it was good. I can't say that happens for all beets, but this guy grew amazing ones. So supposedly, as long as it's bigger than that, you're good. But I like them to get big because I want more food in the same amount of space. And also you're concerned, Heidi's concerned about carrots. So people do pick some carrots early, but you can just, as you need them, you can pull them. I would be more concerned with carrots getting too mature. So whenever they're I sort of push the soil away from the top, and I look at the top and I think, is that a size that I'm ready to eat? You can't see, Heidi, are you saying you can't see your carrots? Yes. Oh, okay. So the carrots are under the ground. So it's okay to just push soil away and put your fingers down there and sort of feel and look. You can even push soil away so you can see the tops of the carrots and see how big they are, how big around they are. Sometimes if your soil is really lumpy, they'll be fat and short, but that's just part of our learning, and and they're still edible. Oh, these are my carrot tips. In fact, if your carrots look like the ones in the lower left, you have carrot rust fly. So you want to put a very light row cover over the top of them. It's got to be super light for summer because heavy row cover holds heat. And we want as much light to come through and as little heat as possible. So see how thin this one is? This one happens to be Agribon brand. It's AG15. It's their lightest one. You see how tight this is over the plants? We don't want that on our carrot bed. We want it super loose because you're going to put it on when your carrots are maybe not even germinated. You can put it on your bed. You can put it on, when they're little, but the sooner the better. And you want it very loose because those carrots can grow to 18 inches tall. So you're going to need a lot of space for that. What else? You have to bury the edges. So you can either dig a trench and bury the edges all the way around of this material, or I slice down with a flat spade or an edging tool, and then I push it down in there. I can't do it with my fingers because my gardening hands are so craggy, it sticks to my hands, but I use, you could use a credit card or that you're not using, that's expired, or I use a plastic spatula and I just shove it in there. The reason we have to bury the edges is the fly can get under if you don't bury the edges. So that's one thing about carrots. You don't have to use Napoli or Mokum, but I like both of those for winter food. And it says July 1st, but you know, it's not too late. Just slap them in. You could do it this weekend. And to get them to germinate, you need to keep them moist religiously. People say to keep them moist so that it can germinate, put down paper, like layers and layers of newspaper or burlap. But when I do that, if I get one of them to come up, then the next day while the burlap is still there or paper, I'm waiting for the rest of them to, you know, peek up. I just want a few more to peek up. Those get mowed. Whatever comes up keeps getting mowed under there. So I would either remove it as soon as the first carrot comes up, or put window screens to kind of shade it a little bit. The window screens don't encourage the insects so much. You can leave them in the ground and you mulch them. And you do want to pull them early February, because all that food in that carrot in the spring is going to be pulled out and turned into a new plant and seeds. That's the whole goal of having the carrot, is so that the next year you can use it to make a plant. And as that happens, the carrot changes chemically and gets degraded. So it's not so tasty. So early February, I'm out there and I see a little leaf growth and I think, oh, I have to get the carrots out. You can do it before that if you want. So I dig them all out and I store them in the fridge, and they'll store forever. Parsnips, usually people plant parsnips in spring and then they treat them like carrots and they eat them, dig them out of the winter garden. Now, I don't usually start parsnips this late, but when I start parsnips in even June, I end up with parsnips that are like this big around. So I suspect that you should try parsnips planted like immediately and see if they get pretty big for you to have in the winter time. And again, you need to pull them just like those carrots. And parsnip chips are delicious. You bake them in the oven. John, do you have, John Fawcett, do you have a recipe for parsnip chips?
I do not. I mostly eat my parsnips like mashed potato. They're just so tasty.
Isn't that great? Yum. Yes. Okay, well, spring is called the Hungry Gap. I referenced this before, I referred to it before, because in traditional societies, like the whole history of humanity, we didn't have glass houses, or only the very richest princes had glass houses. So everybody else had to rely on stored food. And in an environment like this, which is our ecosystem, our climate, I should say, in Western Washington and in the UK have a very similar climate. And what happens is it starts to warm up in the spring, March, April, May, even June. The apples start rotting because it's not cold enough for them to be stored anymore. This happens to all the fruit that was stored. It happens to the roots. The new chickens are too small to eat. Often they're not laying eggs in the early season anyway, they're not. And even meat that was stored, it's warm enough that it's not easily stored anymore. So this was actually a starvation time. And we can still see it in our gardens because it's really hard to get something harvestable out of your garden February, March, April, May. But there are ways around it. So you can plant now to eat in the Hungry Gap. And look at this. These are all the things that will grow that you can eat in your Hungry Gap. You can definitely, of course, eat beets and carrots that you pull out of your garden in the, right in February, and then you have those stored. I already talked about the escarole and how it grows back. That's the upper left corner. The middle one right here, this is Rob, if you haven't eaten it before. This is, you can get it from kale. I leave in my Brussels sprouts. I've picked all the Brussels sprouts and I leave that, and then it shoots back and I eat all of that. I've done it with cabbage heads, all kinds of things. So just let them shoot and then see what happens. What you do is you pick it and then you toss it with salt and olive oil and roast it in a hot oven, like 400 degrees, and it's really delicious. These guys right here, this is a cauliflower. You plant it on July 15th. It's called Prestige. It's in the resource list. And it grows a big plant. And then you think, well, that's terrible. It has produced nothing all winter. And then February, nothing. And then March, nothing. And then end of April, big cauliflower heads. So a good trick for this one and anything that's going to head up in the very early spring like that is to side dress it with some nitrogen when you see the daffodils come out. And the one on the right, the purple one, it's called Purple Cape broccoli. Everybody calls it a cauliflower, but when you cook it, it goes dark green. It looks exactly like a broccoli, and the structure is a broccoli too. So right now, last year and this year, I have not been able to find US sources of Purple Cape broccoli, but I think you might click on the listings in the resource page and see if it's back in stock, because it's really fun too. So Purple Cape, depending on the weather, produces at the end of February or the beginning of May. Sorry, the end of February, beginning of March. So I have February and March, these massive heads, and we have tons of food coming out of the garden then. And then April and May, the cauliflower comes, we have tons of food. So it's really cool. I'm going to talk about the other things that I haven't talked about yet in a minute. Yes, Heidi, it doesn't hurt to push just the soil off the top of the carrot. Yeah, even like that, an inch down. I just want to show you another picture of kale rob, just to say kale rob is fantastic. You can do Sylvetta arugula also. This is the one that is not so fast. It's slow. So you can plant it in late fall or winter. And you know what? I let mine just go to seed, and it takes a super long time for it to go to seed. So maybe in September, it's gone to seed. And then I just throw the seeds around, and it waits all winter and then comes up. In fact, it will come up all over the place. So you may even want to discourage that. But it's very slow to grow, but it is producing, it's produced for about, it produced in May, and then it's still producing now for me. And I just talked about these guys and where you can get them. There is one that doesn't head up, and it's called Purple Sprouting. This is very much better known than the other two. So this is a bundle that someone has collected. So that's what you're collecting, one of those and one of these. So they're little sprouts all over the plant. And then you leave the plant there. You might even side dress that with nitrogen. You've eaten the ones that you took, and then you go out a couple of weeks later and there are more. They tend to be smaller, but you can keep collecting, and they can be quite productive plants. And of course, there are also perennials that will produce for you in the springtime. So all of these, this is an asparagus crown right here. Asparagus can stay in the ground for 30 years. So you want to have a bed that is very well drained and is very easy to keep the weeds out of. So don't put them somewhere where you have sheep sorrel. They don't compete well with the sheep sorrel, but they will make the asparagus itself makes a mat of roots, and it's impossible to weed. So that's kind of daunting, right, and off-putting, but it's a perennial that you have to kind of learn about how to do it. But it will give you, of course, it's one of our earliest spring vegetables. Rhubarb is super easy. It is a big eater and a big drinker. So it loves nitrogen in the spring, and it loves not drying out. But it makes a very pretty ornamental, and it will give you a lot of fruit-like vegetables. The leaves are toxic, so deer don't eat it, which is nice. I have one right in the middle of my front bed, my front flower bed. Down here is artichoke. That's a perennial. They like to be fed nitrogen in the springtime, and that will give you better heads. You can divide them. They end up making a big clump, and then you can divide them and have more and more of them. And they produce in probably early June most of the time. I had this year, yeah, I think early to late June, depending on your microclimate, I would say. They look like they need heat, like they're a desert plant, but they don't. They love marine sun, so like not very hot. So don't put them in your hottest corner. Get them out away from your house. Some people, these are some things that we plant for fall that some people choose to plant for fall to harvest the following summer. So we talked about garlic already, but things like Walla Walla onions are often planted in the fall here. And shallots are also planted in the fall, and then they're harvested early the next summer, like often June, July. And I just wanted to mention that you can fall plant, and then you will have a harvest this next summer. So it's something that you can do. I have 2 planting calendars for you. I have multiple, but I'm going to focus on these 2. This first one, man, if you want some reading, look at the detail that they're giving on every single thing. And this is local too, at least this is the Willamette Valley, so it's pretty local. And it will tell you people's experience and what to look for and all these different particular varieties. So it is great, it's great detail. But I have another one that just gives you the when, the what and when. So look at this. Now, if you've seen this guy's other one for the main season, like the spring and summer veg, you'll think this is the same one, but it's not. This is all winter food. So he tells you exactly when to do your beets and gives you a little bit of detail. So I like this very much. So that link is also in there. On the resource page. And if you don't have the resource page, John will post it again. It's in the chat, so look for it in the chat. It'll say July resource page. Okay, how are we going to put these in our garden? Well, let's find out how. I mean, your garden's already full maybe, right? So let's look. You're going to start them in cells, and so that you can get 3 to 4 weeks of growth on these, sometimes more growth. Sometimes if you want to pot them up, you can hold them for many weeks into like a 2-inch pot or a 4-inch pot. Sometimes it's worth it. So you can have that space in your garden that's finishing one crop, and then they're big and they won't get mowed down by slugs and all that, and they'll be very successful. You can interplant with a crop that'll come out soon. I would say, for example, that you might put lettuces or around your winter squash plants that tend to send their leaves out. You might put your escaroles in there around there, not super close, but like amend the soil a little bit and stick your seedlings in there. And then maybe your winter squash is going to come out in a few weeks after that anyway, or scallion sets between lettuce. But you do want to fertilize those new starts as you do that. You can make a new bed because you have less mowing to do, you have less weeding to do this time of year. And so that's how I made my really big garden. It started out with just 2 beds. And then that fall, I made another bed. And every fall, and sometimes in the spring as well, I'd make 1 more bed. So it's a great time to do it. And it's motivating because you might say, you know, this is not the best place for my garden bed. I want to make one over there. So I can then put winter food into it. So crops that might finish, that are going to come out for you, maybe your spinach, it might start to bolt. If you have peas growing now, they have a lifespan in my experience, and they're not sick, they're just done, or they start to get diseases or something. Sometimes they just kind of wear out. And so these peas here are not ill, they're just done. So then they're going to come out. So what are you going to put there? Maybe you have beets and carrots that are done. Garlic's definitely coming out soon. All kinds of stuff. So I bet there's a lot of stuff that will be coming out of your garden. So here are my fall planting tips. You want to look for things that are listed as winter hardy varieties, and do fertilize before planting and keep them watered, and provide shade if it's a cool weather crop, which is all the brassicas, anything related to a cabbage or peas. And do mulch them, but I wouldn't mulch them when they're really tiny because you're inviting slugs when you mulch. So I tend to just baby them along as much as possible with some shade and some regular watering until they're pretty big. And then I will mulch them with leaves, not with wood chips. Let's see. Oh yeah, some spinach, all spinach and some lettuce tends to like to germinate under 70 degrees. Some will go up to 75. Some lettuce will go that high, but I find that closer to 70 is really nice. And you want to protect them from freezing in most cases, and we'll talk about how to do that just a sec. And your winter foods are going to resprout. So you have to say, do I want that or not? I don't want carrots and parsnips to resprout, so I'm going to have to pull them out and store them in the fridge in February. But for all my brassicas, I do want to eat those sprouts, so I'm going to leave those in. So here's who gets what protection. So brassicas generally, if they don't have a head on them or any broccoli heads, then generally they're tough enough. If they have a head on them and snow is coming, I'll fold up an old towel or something and I'll flop it over the head and maybe put a bucket over it or something like that. So root vegetables and garlic get chopped leaves for me. Some people use straw, some people just throw pieces of cardboard over. Garlic, I leave mulched the whole winter. Big plants, I leave mulched the whole winter. Root crops, I'm a little concerned about if you have voles. If you probably know if you have a lot of voles, but some years when I've had a lot of voles, if I just threw cardboard over it and left it there, the voles used that cover to eat them, which is heartbreaking. So what I typically do is I'll put the chopped leaves on, and when I know it's going to freeze, and then I might pull those leaves back and just shove them over to the side of the bed when it's not freezing, if you have vole pressure. So some years I know I have voles and some years I have fewer. Ascarole needs a rain cover. So you might use, instead of chopped leaves, which is shown right here, you might use a tunnel like this. If you want to know how to make that tunnel, I'll give you a couple of details, but you can see the March class and just click along in it until you see how to make a tunnel. Yeah. So these are all sorts of covers. They should be tipped up for venting, but I had gone out to vent them and I took the photo just before that. But these are all kinds of covers. You can use lots of different covers. These are old refrigerator drawers. This is a broken plastic storage box. I wouldn't use a new one. And this is a broken bubble umbrella from the 70s. And then this is one of those tunnels that I talked about a little bit. So here's just some details on the tunnels. This is not fencing and it's not hog panel. Fencing's too flexible. Hog panel's too expensive and too heavy. This is remeshed concrete reinforcing wire. This is either recycled plastic off of a mattress bag, which will last you 1 year. Or if you're going to buy new plastic, I would not buy the plain old stuff from the hardware store because it's going to be trash within a year because it's not sun resistant. So you want UV resistant plastic. There's a listing for buying it in the resource page if you're going to go big and you want to buy some of it. If you want to make one tunnel like this and you would like a piece of plastic, I can do a cost sharing with you. You can email me at the email in the chat and tell me that you'd like a piece of plastic. Yeah, and you can see the details of how to do that. I'm going to skip that because that's in the March class. You can also use a heavy winter fabric row cover. The advantage is that if you have to water in the fall, it can go right through. Although those plastic tunnels they lift right off. You often need to support it so it doesn't rub plants, but you can use a heavier row cover. And then a lot of things just get mulched with chopped leaves. I already talked about that. Garlic doesn't get mulched by voles in my experience. So there is, just to remind you about all the winter food that's under there right now. And I'm going to show you this one. This is was just a photo to Grandma and Grandpa, like, what's up this morning? And those bowls, those metal bowls, are the biggest mixing bowls you can buy, I think. They're just enormous. They've got spinach and escarole in them. You can see there's a little slug damage. That's like an 8-pound cabbage and a bunch of carrots. And this was we took it out of the garden, and this was January 19th. So you can get a lot of food. And this is what we're talking about, is garden food that we eat straight out of the garden in this section. But in the future classes, we're going to talk about the rest of this chart as well. Let's see. So that is it, except I want to tell you about August Veg Club. This is an incredible backyard that we're going to be able to see. It's packed with fruit. So if you think I don't have room, you probably do. You should at least see this garden. He grafts tons of things. He's the head of the fruit club for our island. And make sure that I have your email. If you're already receiving emails from me, then that's fine. You're already on the list. But if not, then you do email me and to get on the reminder list, or you can just write down this address right here, 762 Klickitat Place, and the date. And it's better if you give me your email, because he might want to know how many of us are coming. So I might send you an email to remind you and ask you if you're coming. And it is it's a regular suburban lot. So it's not very big, and it's also on a courtyard. So there's not a lot of parking space. So carpooling and walking and biking are definitely encouraged. And I honestly don't know what the next slide is. Oh, never mind. That's the last one. Ta-da. Does anybody tell me, best time of year to move a rhubarb plant? When it's dormant. So in the winter is a really good time to move it. And sometimes they need to be divided as well. Oh, John says on sprouting broccoli. Do you want to say this out loud, John, or John McInnes? Or do you just
Yeah,
want
the
me to read it?
sprouting
Okay.
broccoli, is it best to encourage side sprouting by cutting off the first sprouts that come up? I grew them one year, and if I remember right, he sprouted up right up the center. And I didn't know if I cut that off early, if that would encourage more side shooting or not. I didn't. I hesitated, and I didn't get a whole lot, but I was curious if that was advisable.
I haven't done that when I've grown it, but I would think you would get branching, right? Is that what you're trying to encourage?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to encourage more. In the back of my head, I think I read that somewhere, but I didn't know if I dreamed it up or read it somewhere. So
were you growing it in the winter, like when it was getting colder and colder, or were you growing it in the spring?
No, in the spring.
That's an interesting bit of experience. When I've had that, I have had it branch pretty effectively, but I really, I wasn't watching for that. So that's an interesting idea. I
had a
suppose it could have helped her. Sorry?
Yeah, different variety than you had listed there. So maybe it was a difference in the variety too. So
yeah. I mean, if you read that as a good idea, I think that's a good tip for all of us. And then what is this about the comment on drying down?
In the resource page, it refers to drying down the Walla Walla sweet onions. And I was curious I know when I've bought them as starts in the past, you got a rubber band around a whole bunch of dried down onions. You were talking earlier about starting Walla Walla sweet onions or sweet onions. You start them from seed and then dry them down. I guess I didn't understand how you get to the.
Oh, it just means they're ripe. Like in summer, you know how onions fall over. Mm-hmm. When you grow onions, they fall over, and then you pull them and you dry them out. That's what it means. I just mean they ripen. They're ready.
Oh, okay.
In the summer, but people plant them. Sometimes they'll plant them in the fall. And I've only done it from, I guess I've done it from plants and sets. I don't usually do it, but I just wanted to mention that people do it. But yeah, I suppose you get a bigger plant, a bigger onion. Are yours pretty big anyway?
This year I've got a mixture of them. So
Okay.
I brought a whole bunch of starts and then I forgot them, left them on the dashboard of my truck.
Oh, okay.
Got them in a little late, so some of them are doing better than others.
Yeah,
but,
I think the overwintered ones of Walla Wallas sometimes dry down pretty early.
Okay.
A little earlier is what I'm told, but that's kind of speculation by me.
Okay,
Let's
I
see.
misunderstood. Yeah, I misunderstood that comment. though,
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Oh, okay, I should clarify that maybe on the page. Let's see, can pumpkins be grown vertically on a trellis or will they break off? What people do with pumpkins is they'll tie like a macrame thing to hold the pumpkin. They'll create a macrame pumpkin holder. So sometimes I see them grown on trellises, but I don't guarantee that they're strong enough to hold themselves up all the time. But if anybody regularly grows pumpkins on trellises, big pumpkins, then let us know. Does anybody have any other comments that you'd like to make or questions or anything? Well, thank you very much then, John. We're done. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And it's time to go eat some supper, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Carol.